Today we're going to take a look at space law and development. Space law sort of came about because of one particular event, but we didn't really start getting into space until recently, and it really kind of started out like the wild, wild west because really wasn't any laws or regulations about anything. It was just, whoever's there first kind of gets to make the rules. So add some of these things to your notes. You'll use them later on. We're going to first look at military uses of space. There was a Conference of Disarmament, CD, established in 1979. They say roots back to 1960, but the purpose was to produce all weapons, including arms race in space, so that we are not weaponizing any satellites or putting any weapons in space that are just sitting there ready to fire on individual countries. So when we talk military uses of space, there really is not supposed to be any. And again, that was established by the UN Conference of Disarmament in 1879. There are non-military uses of space. This coordination was developed through the United Nations. It established a committee in 1958. And the reason that it did was because there was a particular country that launched the very first satellite in space. And do you know what that is? What was the country and what was the name of the satellite that was first launched into space? I'm hoping that you have that one. I'll give you the answer for that in a second, but if you didn't know it, you're going to have to write that down. So they named the United Nations the office, or they named it, United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. And it initially had 24 countries, now has 69 countries. So that country that sort of catalyzed this or started this up was Russia, and it launched Sputnik. The UN Office of Outer Space Affairs has a few purposes. One is promote peaceful use of outer space for all humankind. Also contact with governments and non-government organizations, NGOs, because there's not every country is part of this UN group here. So their job is to stay in contact with different governments and NGOs. Exchange of scientific information in space. That, yes, we have our national secrets, but not all of it is proprietary. Some of it is done just for the good of humankind. And so then this UN office kind of helps to exchange that information. Also to promote international cooperation and to maintain registry of objects launching into space. So everything that launches is supposed to note with the outer space affairs, and we are pretty good at spying to know whether someone does it or not. At this point in our nation, and it's pretty obvious when someone is launching something into space, but they're supposed to also contact the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. So there's a dude looking in a telescope. All right. Space law. Why do we need space law? We need it for to responsibly develop space for the good of humankind. Space law has 5 international treaties and sets of principles agreed to by many nations, not necessarily every nation, but it applies to military and non-military applications. And this is one area that you're going to do a little more research on in areas of space law, how they've been broken, and things like that. So it prevents any claims of possession made for outer space or bodies. You can't claim the moon or a planet or an asteroid or something like that. It also says objects launched into space remain the responsibility and possession of original owners. This is a really huge one here. If you launch into space, it is your responsibility. Not all countries necessarily have abided by that. And that means that if you launch into space and something happens to it, then the remains of it are also your responsibility, which is causing some problems currently. And the state, which means country, the countries from which the object is launched, is responsible for subsequent damages. And that is something that has actually happened. There's been damages by objects launched into space that they may not have accepted responsibility for. So there is an international agreement to promote space for all humankind, also part of this UN group. The United Nations use as mechanism for communication and coordination. So anyone who needs to communicate or coordinate launches or space research is supposed to go through this United Nations group. And space law is supposed to protect space for humankind. And I have some pretty awesome videos to show you about things in space and maybe a little bit more about why we have a need for this. So what I would suggest you do when you start your research is open up this presentation reference. There are a couple links in the notes section, which are going to be down at the bottom of the presentation down here. Oh, I didn't know it did that oh, that's awesome. Look how big that pointer is. All right. So that I think those links are going to help you out when you're doing your research. It's a couple links to help you find some things for space law. So just give that a shot, and you're about to embark into space.